So welcome to ISKCON Dublin to Srimad Bhagavatam reading. Today is Friday the 4th. Yesterday we did the reading. We apologize for everyone online that couldn't access. We had some technical difficulties. We'll just recap what we heard yesterday. And we start reading from the verse 28. But before that, let's recite Mahima Stotra of Sri Sanatana Swami. Sarva Shastravi Piyusha, Sarva Vedaikna Satpala, Sarva Siddhanta Ratnadya, Sarva Lokaika Vikprada. O nectar from the ocean of all scriptures, singular fruit of all the Vedas, rich mine of the precious gems of all conclusive truths. You are the only giver of sight to all the worlds. Sarva Bhagavataya Purana, Srimad Bhagavatam Prabhu, Kalidanto Ditaditya, Shri Krishna Parivartita. O life fair of all the Supreme Lord's devotees, O Master Srimad Bhagavatam. You are the sun risen in darkness of Kali. You are the exact image of Shri Krishna. Paramananda Patnaya, Prema Vakshkarayate, Sarvada Sarvasivaya, Shri Krishna Namostame. I bow down to you who are supremely blissful to read. Your every syllable pours down a flood of prema. You can always be served by everyone. You are Shri Krishna himself. Madhikaha Bandhu Matsangin, Madguru, Madmahandana, Madmishtaraka Madbhagya, Madananda Namostate. My only friend, my constant companion, my spiritual master, my great love, my savior, my good fortune, my source of ecstasy, I bow down to you. Asadu sadutadayin, afinicho chataraka, hanamuncha kadachima, prema hritkantayospura. O bestower of saintliness to the unsaintly, O exalter of the most fallen, please never leave me. Always appear in my heart and my voice with pure love. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 So Hare Krishna. Just as I mentioned, what we all missed, including myself, yesterday's reading, which was done by Dina and John Prabhos. We did a good portion of 11th chapter entitled Lord Krishna's entrance into Dwarka. I think we started at verse 7 or somewhere there, which where citizens welcomes the Lord by all the gifts and glorify him. Then the few verses that describe the city of Dwarka. Then Lord reciprocates their reception. I need to go back and read all of that around there. And we had verse 28, so last few verses from 24 there was descriptions of Lord's beauty. And there are four aspects. I'll just read this. There are four aspects of Lord Krishna's beauty. His chest is described as a boat of Lakshmi. His face is described as drinking vessels for the eyes. His arms are described as resting places for demigods, and his feet are refuge for pure devotees. Okay. So 28. It's starting today. 28 translation. After entering the house of his father, he was embraced by the mothers present, and the Lord offered his obeisances unto them by placing his head at their feet. The mothers were headed by Devaki, his real mother. Purport. It appears that Vasudeva, the father of Lord Krishna, had completely separate residential quarters, where he lived with his 18 wives, out of whom Srimati Devaki is the real mother of Lord Krishna. But in spite of this, all other stepmothers were equally affectionate to him, as will be evident from the following verse. Lord Krishna also did not distinguish his real mother from his stepmothers, and he equally offered his obeisances unto all the wives of Vasudeva present on the occasion. According to scriptures also, there are 7 mothers, 1 the real mother, 2 the wife of the spiritual master, 3 the wife of a Brahmana, 4 the wife of a king, of digging, 5 the cow, 6 the nurse, and 7 the earth. All of them are mothers. Even by this injunction of the Shastras, the stepmother, who is the wife of the father, is also as good as the mother, because the father is also one of the spiritual masters. Lord Krishna, the Lord of the universe, plays the part of an ideal son, just to teach others how to treat their stepmothers. 29. The mothers, after embracing their son, set him on their laps. Due to pure affection, milk sprang from their breasts. They were overwhelmed with delight, and the tears from their eyes wetted the Lord. Purport. When Lord Krishna was at Vrindavan, even the cows would become moistened by affection towards him, and he would draw milk from the nipples of every affectionate living being, so what to speak of the stepmothers, who were already as good as his own mother. 30. Thereafter the Lord entered his palaces, which were perfect to the fullest extent. His wives lived in them, and they numbered over 16,000. Purport. Lord Krishna had 16,108 wives, and for each and every one of them there was a fully equipped palace, complete with necessary compounds and gardens. Full description of these palaces is given in the 10th canto. All the palaces were made of the best marble stone. They were illuminated by jewels and decorated by curtains and carpets of velvet and silk, nicely bedecked and embroidered with gold lace. The personality regarded means one who is full with all power, all energy, all opulences, all beauties, all knowledge, and all renunciation. Therefore, in the palaces of the Lord, there was nothing wanting for fulfilling all desires of the Lord. The Lord is unlimited, and therefore his desires are also unlimited, and the supply is also unlimited. Everything being unlimited is everything being unlimited, it is concisely described here as samakama, or full with all desirable equipment. Samakama. 31. The queens of Lord Sri Krishna rejoiced within their minds to see their husbands home after a long period abroad. The queens got up at once from their seats and meditations. As was socially customary, they covered their faces shyly and looked about quietly. Perfect. As mentioned above, the Lord entered his home palaces occupied by 16,108 wives, queens. This means that the Lord at once expanded himself in as many plenary expansions as there were queens and palaces, and entered in each and every one of them simultaneously and separately. Here is another manifestation of the feature of his internal potency. He can expand himself in as many forms of spiritual identity as he desires, even though he is one without a second. It is confirmed by the Shruti mantra that the Absolute is one alone, and yet he becomes many as soon as he so desires. These manifold expansions of the Supreme Lord are manifested as plenary and separated portions. The separated portions are representations of his energy, and the plenary portions are manifestations of his personality. Thus the personality of God had manifested himself in 16,108 plenary expansions, and simultaneously entered into each and every one of the palaces of the queens. This is called Vaibhava, or the transcendental potency of the Lord. And because he can do so, he is also known as Yogeshwara. Ordinarily, a yogi or mystic living being is able to expand himself at utmost to tenfold expansions of his body. But the Lord can do so to the extent of as many thousands or infinitely as he likes. Unbelievers become astonished to learn that Lord Krishna married more than 16,000 queens, because they think of Lord Krishna as one of them and measure the potency of the Lord by their own limited potency. One should know, therefore, that the Lord is never on the level of the living beings, who are but expansions of his marginal potency, and one should never equalize the potent and the potency, although there is very little difference of quality between the potent and the potency. The queens were also expansions of his internal potency, and thus the potent and the potencies are perpetually exchanging transcendental pleasures, known as pastimes of the Lord. One should not, therefore, become astonished to learn that the Lord married so many wives. On the contrary, one should affirm that even if the Lord marries 16,000 million wives, he is not completely manifesting his unlimited and inexhaustible potency. He married only 16,000 wives and entered in each and every one of the different palaces just to impress in the history of the human beings on the surface of the earth that the Lord is never equal to or less than any human being, however powerful he may be. No one, therefore, is either equal to or greater than the Lord. The Lord is always great in all respects. God is great, is eternal truth. Therefore, as soon as the queens saw from a distance their husband, who was away from home for long periods due to the battle of Kurukshetra, they all arose from the slumber of meditation and prepared to receive their most beloved. According to Yajnavalkya's religious injunctions, a woman whose husband is away from home should not take part in any social functions, should not decorate her body, should not laugh, and should not go to any relative's house in any circumstance. This is the vow of the ladies whose husbands are away from home. At the same time, it is also enjoined that a wife should never present herself before the husband in an unclean state. She must decorate herself with ornaments and good dress, and should always be present before the husband in a happy and joyous mood. The queens of Lord Krishna were all in meditation, thinking of the Lord's absence, and were always meditating upon him. The Lord's devotees cannot live for a moment without meditating on the Lord, and what to speak of the queens who were all goddesses of fortune incarnated as queens in the pastimes of the Lord of Dwarka. They can never be separated from the Lord, either by presence or by trance. The gopis at Vrindavan could not forget the Lord when the Lord was away in the forest cow herding. When the Lord boy Krishna was absent from their village, the gopis at home used to worry about him traversing the rough ground with his soft lotus feet. By thinking thus, they were sometimes overwhelmed in trance and mortified in the heart. Such is the condition of the pure associates of the Lord. They are always in trance, and so the queens were in trance during the absence of the Lord. Presently, having seen the Lord from a distance, they at once gave up all their engagements, including the vows of woman as described above. According to Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, there was a regular psychological reaction on the occasion. First of all, rising from their seats, although they wanted to see their husband, they were deterred because of feminine shyness. But due to strong ecstasy, they overcame that stage of weakness and became caught up with the idea of embracing the Lord, and this thought factually made them unconscious of their surrounding environment. This prime state of ecstasy annihilated all other formalities and social conventions, and thus they escaped all stumbling blocks on the path of meeting the Lord. And that is the perfect stage of meeting the Lord of the soul, Sri Krishna. 32. The insuperable ecstasy was so strong that the queens, who were shy, first embraced the Lord in the innermost recesses of their hearts. Then they embraced him visually, and then they sent their sons to embrace him, which is equal to personal embrace. But, O chief among the Bhrigus, though they tried to restrain their feelings, they inadvertently shed tears. Purport. Although due to feminine shyness, there were many hindrances to embracing the dear husband, Lord Shri Krishna, the queens performed that act by seeing him, by putting him in the course of their hearts, and by sending their sons to embrace him. Still the act remained unfinished, and tears rolled down their cheeks despite all endeavors to check them. One indirectly embraces the husband by sending the son to embrace him, because the son is developed as part of the mother's body. The embrace of the son is not exactly the embrace of husband and wife from the sexual point of view, but the embrace is satisfaction from the affectionate point of view. The embrace of the eyes is more effective in a conjugal relation, and thus, according to Srila Jiva Goswami, there is nothing wrong in such an exchange of feeling between husband and wife. 33. Although Lord Sri Krishna was constantly by their sides, as well as exclusively alone, his feet appeared to them to be never newer and newer. His feet appeared to them to be newer and newer. The goddess of fortune, although by nature always resting and moving, could not quit the Lord's feet. Sorry?
Restless.
Wait a minute. I should just okay. Apology. Just read again verse 33. Although Lord Shri Krishna was constantly by their sides, as well as exclusively alone, his feet appeared to them to be newer and newer. The goddess of fortune, although by nature always restless and moving, could not quit the Lord's feet. Is that okay?
He said resting the first time.
Hmm?
He said resting the first time. So
Resting, okay.
Yeah.
I said this. So what woman can be detached from those feet, having once taken shelter of them? Purport. Conditioned living beings are always after the favor of the goddess of fortune, although by nature she is moving from one place to another. In the material world no one is permanently fortunate, however clever one may be. There have been so many big empires in different parts of the world. There have been so many powerful kings all over the world, and there have been so many fortunate men, but all of them have been liquidated gradually. This is the law of material nature, but spiritually it is different. According to Brahma Samhita, the Lord is served very respectfully by hundreds and thousands of goddesses of fortune. They are always in a lonely place also with the Lord. But still the association of the Lord is so inspiringly newer and newer that they cannot quit the Lord for a moment, even though they are by nature very restless and are moving about. Spiritual relation with the Lord is so enlivening and resourceful that no one can leave the company of the Lord once having taken shelter of Him. The living beings are by constitution feminine by nature. The male or enjoyer is the Lord, and all manifestations of his different potencies are feminine by nature. In the Bhagavad Gita, the living beings are designated as para prakriti, or the superior potency. The material elements are apara prakriti, or inferior potency. Such potencies are always employed for the satisfaction of the employer or the enjoyer. The supreme enjoyer is the Lord Himself, as stated in the Bhagavad Gita 5:21. The potencies, therefore, when engaged directly in the service of the Lord, revive the natural color, and thus there is no disparity in the relation of the potent and potency. Generally, people engaged in service are always seeking some post under the government or the supreme enjoyer of the state. Since the Lord is the supreme enjoyer of everything in or outside the universe, it is happiness to be employed by Him. Once engaged in the supreme governmental service of the Lord, no living being wishes to be relieved from the engagement. The highest perfection of human life is to seek some employment under the Lord's supreme service. That will make one extremely happy. One need not seek the moving goddess of fortune without the relation of the Lord. 33. The Lord was pacified after killing those kings who were burdensome to the earth. They were puffed up with their military strength, their horses, elephants, chariots, infantry, etc. He himself was not a party in the fight. He simply created hostility between the powerful administrators, and they fought amongst themselves. He was like the wind which causes friction between bamboos and so sparks a fire. As stated above, the living beings are not factory enjoyers of things which are manifested as God's creation. The Lord is the genuine proprietor and enjoyer of everything manifested in His creation. Unfortunately, influenced by the deluding energy, the living being becomes a false enjoyer under the dictation of the modes of nature. Puffed up by such a false sense of becoming God, the deluded living being increases his material strength by so many activities, and thus becomes the burden of the earth, so much so that the earth becomes completely uninhabitable by the same. This state of affairs is called dharmasya glani, or misuse of the energy of the human being. When such misuse of human energy is prominent, the saner living beings become perturbed by the awkward situation created by the vicious administrators, who are simply burdens of the earth, and the Lord appears by his internal potency just to save the saner section of humanity and to alleviate the burden due to the earthly administrators in different parts of the world. He does not favor either of the unwanted administrators, but by his potential power he creates hostility between such unwanted administrators, as the air creates fire in the forest by the friction of the bamboos. The fire in the forest takes place automatically by the force of the air, and similarly the hostility between different groups of politicians takes place by the unseen design of the Lord. The unwanted administrators, puffed up by the false power and military strength, thus become engaged in fighting amongst themselves over ideological conflicts, and so exhaust themselves in all powers. The history of the world reflects this factual will of the Lord, and it will continue to be enacted until the living beings are attached to the service of the Lord. In the Bhagavad Gita, this fact is very vividly described. 740. It is said, "The deluding energy is my potency, and thus it is not possible for the dependent living beings to supersede the strength of the material modes. But those who take shelter in me, the personality of God, Sri Krishna, can cross over the gigantic ocean of material energy." This means that no one can establish peace and prosperity in the world by fruitive activities, or by speculative philosophy or ideology. The only way is to surrender under the Supreme Lord, and thus become free from all illusion of the deluding energy. Unfortunately, persons who are engaged in the destructive work are unable to surrender to the personality of God. They are all fools of the first order. They are the lowest of the human species alive. They are robbed of their knowledge, although apparently they seem to be academically educated. They are all of the demonic mentality, always challenging the supreme power of the Lord. Those who are very materialistic, always hankering after material power and strength, are undoubtedly fools of the first order, because they have no information of the living energy, and being ignorant of that supreme spiritual science, they are absorbed in material science, which ends with the end of the material body. They are the lowest of human beings, because the human life is especially meant for re-establishing the lost relation with the Lord, and they miss this opportunity by being engaged in material activities. They are robbed of their knowledge, because even after prolonged speculation, they cannot reach to the stage of knowing the personality of God, the sum and bone of everything. And all of them are men of demonic principle, and they suffer the consequences, as did such materialistic heroes as Ravana, Hiranyakashipu, Kamsa, and others. 25. That Supreme Personality of God, Sri Krishna, out of his causeless mercy, appeared on this planet by his internal potency and enjoyed himself amongst competent women as if he were engaging in mundane affairs. Purport. The Lord married and lived like a householder. This is certainly like a mundane affair, but when we learn that he married 16,108 wives and lived with them separately in each and every palace, certainly it is not mundane. Therefore the Lord, living as a householder amongst his competent wives, is never mundane. Therefore the Lord, living as a householder amongst his competent wives, is never mundane, and his behavior with them is never to be understood as mundane sex relation. The women who became the wives of the Lord are certainly not ordinary women, because to get the Lord as one's husband is the result of many millions of births, tapasya, austerity. When the Lord appears on different lokas or planets, or on this planet of human beings, he displays his transcendental pastime just to attract the conditioned souls to become his eternal servitors, friends, parents, and lovers, respectively, in the transcendental world, where the Lord eternally reciprocates such exchanges of service. Service is pervertedly represented in the material world and broken untimely, resulting in sad experience. The illusioned living being, conditioned by material nature, cannot understand out of ignorance that all our relations here in the mundane world are temporary and full of inebrities. Such relations cannot help us be happy perpetually, but if the same relation is established with the Lord, then we are transferred to the transcendental world after leaving this material body and become eternally related with him in the relation we desire. The women amongst whom he lived as their husband are not, therefore, women of this mundane world, but are eternally related with him as transcendental wives, a position which they attain by perfection of devotional service. That is their competency. The Lord is Param Brahma, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Conditioned souls seek after perpetual happiness in all places, not only on this earth, but also on other planets throughout the universe, because constitutionally a spiritual spark, as he is, can travel to any part of God's creation. But being conditioned by the material modes, he tries to travel in space by spacecraft and so fails to reach his destination. The law of gravitation is binding upon him like the shackles of a prisoner. By other processes he can reach anywhere, but even if he reaches the highest planet, he cannot attain that perpetual happiness from which he is searching life after life. When he comes to his senses, however, he seeks after Brahman happiness, knowing it for certain that unlimited happiness which he is seeking is never attainable in the material world. As such, the Supreme Being, Brahman, certainly does not seek his happiness anywhere in the material world, nor can his paraphernalia of happiness be found in the material world. He is not impersonal. Because he is the leader and Supreme Being amongst innumerable living beings, he cannot be impersonal. He is exactly like us, and he has all the propensities of an individual living being in fullness. He married exactly like us, but his marriage is neither mundane nor limited by our experience in the conditioned state. His wives, therefore, appear like mundane women, but factually they are all transcendental liberated souls, perfect manifestations of internal energy. Text 36. Although the queen's beautiful smiles and furtive glances were all spotless and exciting, and although they could conquer Cupid himself by making him give up his bow in frustration, and although even the torrent Shiva could fall victim to them, still, despite all their magical feats and attractions, they could not agitate the senses of the Lord. Purport. The path of salvation, or the path of going back to Godhead, always forbids the association of women, and the complete Sanatana Dharma or Varnashram Dharma scheme forbids or restricts association with women. How then can one be accepted as the Supreme Personality of Godhead who is addicted to more than 16,000 wives? Question. This question may be relevantly raised by inquisitive persons really anxious to know about the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord. And to answer such questions, the sages at Naimisharanya have discussed the transcendental character of the Lord in this and in following verses. It is clear herein that the feminine attractive features which can conquer Cupid or even the supermost tolerant Lord Shiva could not conquer the senses of the Lord. Cupid's business is to invoke mundane lust. The whole universe is moving, being agitated by Cupid's arrow. The activities of the world are being carried on by the central attraction of male and female. A male is searching after a mate to his liking, and the female is looking after a suitable male. That is the way of material stimulus. And as soon as a male is combined with a female, the material bondage of the living being is at once tightly interlocked by sex relation, and as a result of this, both the male's and female's attraction for sweet home, motherland, bodily offspring, society and friendship, and accumulation of wealth becomes the illusory field of activities, and thus a false but indefatigable attraction for the temporary material existence, which is full of miseries, is manifest. Those who are therefore on the path of salvation, for going back home, back to Godhead, are especially advised by all scriptural instructions to become free from such paraphernalia of material attraction. And that is possible only by the association of the devotees of the Lord, who are called the Mahatmas. Cupid throws his arrow upon the living beings to make them mad after the opposite sex, whether the party is actually beautiful or not. Cupid's provocations are going on even among beastly societies, who are all ugly looking in the estimation of the civilized nations. Thus Cupid's influence is exerted even amongst the ugliest forms, and what to speak of the most perfect beauties. Lord Shiva, who is considered to be most tolerant, was also struck by Cupid's arrow, because he also became mad after the Mohini incarnation of the Lord, and acknowledged himself to be defeated. Cupid, however, was himself captivated by the grave and exciting dealings of the goddesses of fortune, and he voluntarily gave up his bow and arrow in a spirit of frustration. Such was the beauty and attraction of the queens of Lord Krishna. Yet they could not disturb the transcendental senses of the Lord. This is because the Lord is all-perfect, Atmanama, or self-sufficient. He does not require anyone's extraneous help for his personal satisfaction. Therefore, the queens could not satisfy the Lord by their feminine attractiveness, but they satisfied him by their sincere affection and service. Only by unalloyed transcendental loving service could they satisfy the Lord, and the Lord was pleased to treat them as wives in reciprocation. Thus, being satisfied by their unalloyed service only, the Lord reciprocated the service just like a devout husband. Otherwise, he had no business becoming the husband of so many wives. He is the husband of everyone, but to one who accepts him as such, he reciprocates. This unalloyed affection for the Lord is never to be compared to mundane lust. It is purely transcendental, and the great dealings which the queens displayed in natural feminine ways were also transcendental, because the feelings were expressed out of transcendental ecstasy. It is already explained in the previous verse that the Lord appeared like a mundane husband, but factually his relation with the wives was transcendental, pure and unconditioned by the modes of material nature. Text 37. The common materialistic conditioned souls speculate that the Lord is among them. Out of their ignorance, they think that the Lord is affected by matter, although he is unattached. The word Abuddha is significant here. Due to ignorance only, the foolish mundane wranglers misunderstand the Supreme Lord and spread their foolish imaginations amongst innocent persons by propaganda. The Supreme Lord Sri Krishna is the original primeval personality of Godhead, and when he was personally present before the eyes of everyone, he displayed full-fledged divine potency in every field of activities. As we have already explained in the first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, he is completely independent to act however he likes, but all his actions are full of bliss, knowledge, and eternity. Only the foolish mundaners misunderstand him, unaware of his eternal form of knowledge and bliss, which is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita and Upanishads. His different potencies work in a perfect plan of natural sequence, and doing everything by the agency of his different potencies, he remains eternally the supreme independent. When he descends on the material world by his causeless mercy to different living beings, he does so by his own potency. He is not subject to any condition of the material modes of nature, and he descends as he is originally. The mental speculators misunderstand him as the Supreme Person, and they consider his impersonal features as inexplicable Brahman to be all. Such a conception is also the product of conditioned life, because they cannot go beyond their own personal capacity. Therefore, one who considers the Lord on the level of one's limited potency is only a common man. Such a man cannot be convinced that the personality of Godhead is always unaffected by the modes of material nature. He cannot understand that the sun is always unaffected by infectious matter. The mental speculators compare everything from the standpoint of experimental knowledge of their own selves. Thus, when the Lord is found to act like an ordinary person in matrimonial bondage, they consider him to be like one of them, without considering that the Lord can at once marry 16,000 wives or more. Due to a profound knowledge, they accept one side of the picture while disbelieving the other. This means that due to ignorance only, they always think of Lord Krishna as like themselves and make their own conclusions, which are absurd and unauthentic from the version of the Srimad Bhagavatam. 38. This is the divinity of the personality of Godhead. He is not affected by the qualities of material nature, even though he is in contact with them. Similarly, the devotees who have taken shelter of the Lord do not become influenced by the material qualities. Purport. In the Vedas and Vedic literatures, Shruti and Smriti, it is affirmed that in the divinity there is nothing material. He is transcendental, nirguna, only, the supreme cognizant. Hari, or the personality of Godhead, is the supreme transcendental person situated beyond the range of material affection. These statements are also confirmed even by Acharya Shankara. One may argue that his relation with the goddesses of fortune may be transcendental, but what about his relation with the Yadu dynasty, being born in that family, or his killing the non-believers like Jarasandha and other asuras directly in contact with the modes of material nature? The answer is that the divinity of the personality of God is never in contact with the qualities of material nature in any circumstances. Actually, he is in contact with such qualities because he is the ultimate source of everything, yet he is above the actions of such qualities. He is known therefore as Yogeshvara, or the master of mystic power, or in other words, the all-powerful. Even his learned devotees are not affected by the influence of the material modes. The great six Goswamis of Vrindavan all came from greatly rich and aristocratic families, but when they adopted the life of mendicants at Vrindavan, superficially they appeared to be in the wretched conditions of life, but factually they were the richest of all in spiritual values. Such Mahabhagavatas, or first-grade devotees, although moving amongst men, are not contaminated by honor or insult, hunger or satisfaction, sleep or wakefulness, which are all resultant actions of the three modes of material nature. Similarly, some of them are engaged in worldly dealings, yet are unaffected. Unless these neutralities of life are there, one cannot be considered situated in transcendence. The divinity and his associates are on the same transcendental plane, and their glories are always sanctioned by the action of Yogamaya, or the eternal potency of the Lord. The devotees of the Lord are always transcendental, even if they are sometimes found to have fallen in their behavior. The Lord emphatically declares in the Bhagavad Gita 9:30 that even if the unalloyed devotee is found to be fallen due to previous material contamination, he is nevertheless to be accepted as fully transcendental because of his being engaged 100% in the devotional service of the Lord. The Lord protects him always because of his rendering service unto him, and the following conditions are to be considered accidental and temporary. They will vanish in no time. 39. The simple and delicate women truly thought that Lord Sri Krishna, their beloved husband, followed them and was dominated by them. They were unaware of the extent of the glories of their husband, as the atheists are unaware of him as the supreme controller. Purport. Even the transcendental wives of Lord Sri Krishna did not know completely the unfathomable glories of the Lord. This ignorance is not mundane because there is some action of the internal potency of the Lord in the exchange of feelings between him and his eternal associates. The Lord exchanges transcendental relations in 5 ways: as proprietor, master, friend, son, and lover, and in each of these pastimes he plays fully by the potency of Yogamaya, eternal potency. He plays exactly like an equal friend with the cowherd boys, or even with friends like Arjuna. He plays exactly like a son in the presence of Yashodamata. He plays exactly like a lover in the presence of the cowherd damsels, and he plays exactly like a husband in the presence of the queens of Dwarka. Such devotees of the Lord never think of the Lord as a supreme, but think of him exactly as a common friend, a pet son, or a lover or husband very much dear to heart and soul. That is the relation between the Lord and his transcendental devotees, who act as his associates in the spiritual sky, where there are innumerable Vaikuntha planets. When the Lord descends, he does so along with his entourage to display a complete picture of the transcendental world, where pure love and devotion for the Lord prevail without any mundane tinge of lording it over the creation of the Lord. Such devotees of the Lord are all liberated souls, perfect representations of the marginal or internal potency, in complete negation of the influence of the external potency. The wives of Lord Krishna were made to forget the immeasurable glories of the Lord by the internal potency, so that there might not be any flow of exchange, and they took it for granted that the Lord was a hand-packed husband, always following them in lonely places. In other words, even the personal associates of the Lord do not know him perfectly well. So what do the thesis writers or mental speculators know about the transcendental glories of the Lord? The mental speculators present different theses as to his becoming the cause of the creation, the ingredients of the creation, or the materially efficient cause of the creation, etc. But all this is but partial knowledge about the Lord. Factually, they are as ignorant as the common man. The Lord can be known by the mercy of the Lord only, and by no other means. But since the dealings of the Lord with his wives are based on pure transcendental love and devotion, the wives are all on the transcendental plane without material contamination. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the first canto, 11th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Lord Krishna's Entrance into Dwarka. So, we continue. Do you have any comments? Anything on that?
Yes.
Okay, they can participate. Don't be shy. If you're with me.
It is mine probably.
Okay, Haribol everyone, we continue with reading of Srimad Bhagavatam. We are at chapter 12. And topic of this chapter, the name of this chapter is Birth of Emperor Parikshit. We have 10 minutes. Okay. Text number 1. The sage Shaunaka said, the womb of Uttara, mother of Maharaj Parikshit, was spoiled by the dreadful and invincible Brahmastra weapon released by Ashwatthama. But Maharaj Parikshit was saved by the Supreme Lord. Purport. The sages assembled in the forest of Namasharanya inquired from Sutta Goswami about the birth of Maharaj Parikshit. But in the course of the narration, other topics like the release of the Brahmastra by the son of Drona, his punishment by Arjuna, Queen Kuntidevi's prayers, the Pandavas' visit to the place where Bhishmadeva was lying, his prayers, and thereafter the Lord's departure of Dwarka were discussed. His arrival at Dwarka and residing with the 16,000 queens, etc., were narrated. The sages were absorbed in hearing such descriptions, but now they wanted to turn to the original topic, and thus the inquiry was made by Shwanakarish. So the subject of the release of the Brahmastra weapon by Ashwatthama is renewed. Text number 2. How was the great Emperor Parikshit, who was a highly intelligent and great devotee, born in that womb? How did his death take place, and what did he achieve after his death? Purport. The king of Hastinapura, now Delhi, used to be the emperor of the world, at least till the time of the son of Emperor Parikshit. Maharaj Parikshit was saved by the Lord in the womb of his mother, so he could certainly be saved from an untimely death due to the ill will of the son of the Brahmana. Because the age of Kali began to act just after the assumption of power by Maharaj Parikshit, the first sign of misgivings was exhibited in the cursing of such a greatly intelligent and devoted king as Maharaj Parikshit. The king is the protector of the helpless citizens, and their welfare, peace, and prosperity depend on him. And their welfare, peace, and prosperity depend on him. Unfortunately, by the instigation of the fallen age of Kali, an unfortunate Brahmana son was employed to condemn the innocent Maharaj Parikshit, and so the king had to prepare himself for death within 7 days. Maharaj Parikshit is especially famous as one who is protected by Vishnu, and when he was unduly cursed by the Brahmana's son, he could have invoked the mercy of the Lord to save him, but he did not want to because he was a pure devotee. A pure devotee never asked the Lord for any undue favor. Maharaj Parikshit knew that the curse of the Brahmana's son upon him was unjustified, as everyone else knew, but he did not want to counteract it, because he knew also that the age of Kali had begun, and that the first symptom of the age, namely degradation of the highly talented Brahmana community, had also begun. He did not want to interfere with the current of the time, but he prepared himself to meet them very cheerfully and very properly. Being fortunate, he got at least 7 days to prepare himself to meet them, and so he properly utilized the time in the association of Shukadeva Goswami, the great sage, the great saint and devotee of the Lord. Text 3. We all respectfully want to hear about him, Maharaj Parikshit, to whom Shukadeva... Oops. Sorry. Lost it. We all respectfully want to hear about him, Maharaj Parikshit, to whom Shukadeva Goswami imparted transcendental knowledge. Please speak on this matter. Purport. Shukadeva Goswami imparted transcendental knowledge to Maharaj Parikshit during the remaining 7 days of his life, and Maharaj Parikshit heard him properly, just like an ardent student. The effect of such a bona fide hearing and chanting of Srimad Bhagavatam was equally shared by both the hearer and the chanter. Both of them were benefited. After the 9 different transcendental means of devotional service to the Lord prescribed in the Bhagavatam, either all of them, or some of them, or even one of them, are equally beneficial if properly discharged. Maharaj Parikshit and Shukadeva Goswami were serious performers of the first 2 important items, namely the process of chanting and the process of hearing, and therefore both of them were successful in their laudable attempt. Transcendental realization is attained by such serious hearing and chanting and not otherwise. This is especially important for us as well. There is a type of spiritual master and disciple much advertised in this age of Kali. It is said that the master injects spiritual force into the disciple by an electrical current generated by the master, and the disciple begins to feel the shock. He becomes unconscious, and the master weeps for his exhausting his store of so-called spiritual assets. Such bogus advertisement is going on in this age, and the poor common man is becoming the victim of such advertisement. We do not find such folk tales in the dealings of Shukadeva Goswami and his great disciple Maharaj Parikshit. The sage recited Srimad Bhagavatam in devotion, and the great king heard him properly. The king did not feel any shock of electrical current from the master, nor did he become unconscious while receiving knowledge from the master. One should not, therefore, become a victim of these unauthorized advertisements made by some bogus representative of learning knowledge. The sages of Namasharana were very respectful in hearing about Maharaj Parikshit because of his receiving knowledge from Shukadeva Goswami by means of ardent hearing. Ardent hearing from a bona fide master is the only way to receive transcendental knowledge, and there is no need for medical performances or occult mysticism for miraculous effects. The process is simple, but only the sincere party can achieve the desired success, desired result. Text 4. Sri Sutta Goswami said, Emperor Yudhishthira administered generously to everyone during his reign. He was exactly like his father. He had no personal ambition and was freed from all sorts of sense gratification because of his continuous service unto the lotus feet of Lord Sri Krishna. Purport. As mentioned in our introduction, there is a need for the science of Krishna in human society for all the suffering humanity of the world, and we simply request the leading personalities of all nations to take to the science of Krishna for their own good, for the good of society, and for the good of all the people of the world. End quote. So it is confirmed herein by the example of Maharaj Yudhishthira, the personality of goodness. In India, the people hanker after Rama Raja, because the personality of Godhead was the ideal king, and all other kings or emperors in India controlled the destiny of the world for the prosperity of every living being who took birth on the earth. Herein the word Praja is significant. The etymological import of the word is that which is born. On the earth there are many species of life, from the aquatics up to the perfect human beings, and all are known as Prajas. Lord Brahma, the creator of this particular universe, is known as Prajapati, because he is the grandfather of all who have taken birth. Thus Praja is used in a broader sense than it is now used. The king represents all living beings, aquatics, plants, trees, reptiles, birds, animals, and man. Every one of them is a part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. And the king, being the representative of the Supreme Lord, is duty bound to give proper protection to every one of them. This is not the case with the presidents and dictators of this demoralized system of administration, where the lower animals are given no protection, while the higher animals are given so-called protection. But this is a great science, which can be learned only by one who knows the science of Krishna. By knowing the science of Krishna, one can become the most perfect man in the world, and unless one has knowledge of this science, all qualifications and doctorate diplomas acquired by academic education are spoiled and useless. Maharaj Yudhishthira knew the science of Krishna very well, for it is stated here that by continuous cultivation of this science, or by continuous devotional service to Lord Krishna, he acquired the qualification of administering the state. The father is sometimes seemingly cruel to the son, But that does not mean that the father has lost the qualification to be a father. A father is always a father because he always has the good of the son at heart. The father wants every one of his sons to become a better man than himself. Therefore, a king like Maharaj Yudhishthira, who was the personality of goodness, wanted everyone under his administration, especially human beings who have better developed consciousness, to become devotees of Lord Krishna, so that everyone can become free from the trifles or trifles, anyway, either of material existence. His motto of administration was all good for the citizens, for as personified goodness, he knew perfectly well what is actually good for them. He conducted the administration on that principle, and not on the Rakshasi, demonic principle of sense gratification. As an ideal king, he had no personal ambition, and there was no place for sense gratification, because all his senses at all times were engaged in the loving service of the Supreme Lord, which includes the partial service to living beings, who form the parts and parcels of the Supreme Whole. Those who are busy rendering service to the parts and parcels, leaving aside the whole, only spoil time and energy, as one does when watering the leaves of a tree without watering the root. If water is poured on a root, the leaves are enlivened perfectly and automatically. But if water is poured on the leaves only, the whole energy is spoiled. Maharaj Yudhishthira, therefore, was constantly engaged in the service of the Lord, and thus the parts and parcels of the Lord, the living beings under his careful administration, were perfectly attended with all comforts in this life and all progress in the next. That is the way of perfect management of state administration. So, we're going to end here. We're going to end at verse 4, continuing reading tomorrow from verse 1 to 5 of Srimad Bhagavatam. Not tomorrow, sorry, take it back. We could go on, it would be nice. Maybe we'll do a few more Saturdays again in future, but we'll continue reading next Wednesday at 6:30. Srimad Bhagavatam.